Yeah, so coming in. Great, people joining us. Good. I can see Donald. Hello, Donald.
Hi, how are you?
Thank you. How are you?
I am all right.
Okay.
A bit of a hectic weekend, but we'll get by.
Get by. Everyone. So our speakers, yeah. Got Lucky Star. Hi, Lucky Star. Just waiting for, I think I saw Wellington earlier. Hi, Wellington. If you're here, just say hi.
How are you? How you doing?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you.
Fantastic. And we also have, do we have Terry?
Yes, how are you?
I am well, thank you. How are you doing, Terry? Is it okay?
I'm good, thank you.
Tirivangani, that's your full name.
Yeah, you can call me T, that's fine.
That's great.
Uh,
Right.
Nice to meet you all.
Yes, and we also have our moderators, Oni and Toby.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, I'm Oyin.
Hi, everyone.
Fantastic. I think we've got everyone now. So we're just going to start, and of course more people are coming, so I'll just be admitting them as we go along. But I will just try, we have like our schedule, so let's just get into it. Wait for a couple of people. Yeah. Right.
Hello?
And we also have Bamise. Hi, Bamise. Hi, Bamise.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. So I think you were on mute earlier. I can hear you. Hi.
Oh, okay. So I just wanted to clarify on my audio.
No problem. No problem. Nice to have you here. Wow, we've got over 80 people joining us today, so it's a lot of people coming in. We'll give it a couple more minutes to see if we can get as many as we can in that space of time. Yep. And then, okay, so yeah. And can everyone hear me okay? Okay, I will. So yeah, let's start it, and yeah, more people come in and then have to allow them in. Right, so hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you're all doing well and keeping safe. Welcome to today's webinar titled "We're All in This Together, Building Financial Resilience with Tax Justice and Strong Institutions." Now, this has always been an important conversation, and because we're currently thinking of how we're going to bounce back financially ruins COVID-19, it would be a good idea to spend 2 hours today, just discussing what this means in practical terms from here on out. And I know our experts obviously spend more time talking about this and discussing this in their daily lives, but we're just going to spend a couple of hours today, and hopefully we can get more information from them and from just everyone who contributes to this discussion. So this webinar is brought to you by Capvine, the Capvine Network, and the Stop the Bleed in Africa campaign. I'm very thrilled to know that you're all joining us from different locations today. So it's really good to have you guys here. It's just got after 2 p.m. here in London where I am, so it's a good afternoon for me. But I know that we've got a lot of people joining us from different different locations. So good morning, depending on where you are joining us from. My name is Bukola Fadaini, and I am the founder of the Capvine Network. But I'm also an investigator at the UK's Financial Ombudsman Service, as my title suggests, which is a public body set up by Parliament to resolve, by the UK Parliament, to resolve disputes between UK financial businesses and yeah, but I won't be speaking, fortunately and unfortunately, in my capacity as an investigator with the Ombudsman Service. Instead, I will be today as the founder. So Capvine encourages young people to get involved in positive conversations around international development. Our work as a social enterprise is focused on transforming these conversations into real opportunities where people at different levels make a sustainable impact. And we all work remotely to do this, but we're currently building a presence in the UK and Nigeria. And just to introduce the Stop the Bleed in Africa campaign to everyone. So Trust Africa, in partnership with like-minded organizations like the Tax Justice Network Africa, have developed to curb illicit financial flows out of the country. And we have members actually from the network joining us today. So hello, everybody. So we've got links to our different social media handles, so Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, as well as our website, just at the bottom of like our presentation today. So if you'd like to know more about what we do and what both organizations are involved in, please feel free to do just that. So today we'll be speaking to 5 speakers from the world of finance and law, and engaging them in 2 different panels around the need to prioritize tax justice and to build strong institutions to basically cope with our new normal. So we'll all have an opportunity to introduce themselves. So in our lightning talks, so I'll allow them to basically do that. And we also have our moderators, Oyi and Toby, who are also members of the Capvine Network, the staff members actually. They've been moderating the panel. So yes, we're currently, in terms of like the recording, and we have made plans to make it available to everyone list after the event. So please give us a couple of days to get everything sorted, and we will out to you along with like our post-event questionnaire. So, please feel free to use the chat box to send questions. We have actually reserved 5 minutes and 20 minutes actually at the end of the session to answer some of the questions that we have received. So if anything does come to mind whilst the speakers are speaking, please by all means make use of the chat box below. So yes, thank you very much for your time. I do hope you find this webinar very insightful. I am going to now call on our first speaker to just give like an introduction on what he does and what his day-to-day role what his day-to-day role involves, and that is Deya, who is the who is the chief executive officer at the Pan-African Law Union. So Donald, to take the floor.
Okay, thank you very much, Bukola. As you already said, my name is Donald Deya, although I prefer to be called Don. I'm a Pan-Africanist of East African origin and of Kenyan birth. I live and work in Arusha in Tanzania now. I head the Secretariat of the Pan-African Lawyers Union, which is our continental umbrella association for African lawyers and African lawyers associations. So we exist to promote the development of the law and the legal profession, but also to contribute to rule of law, human rights, good governance, democracy, with a Pan-African flair, working mostly at the continental level, but of course, associating and collaborating with everybody else across the world. So one of the areas we do work in is economic justice, promoting a continent that is able to provide economic, social, and cultural goods to its people from its own ability, from its own resources. So in that, we work in the area of illicit financial flows, combating corruption, amongst others. Thank you.
Thank you, Don, for your introduction. We're glad to have you here today. Can I just make a note to Bukola, please, if you could mute everyone else on the call? Thank you. So I will be inviting Bamise Fatoke to please introduce herself to the call, please.
Hi, hello.
Hi, Bamise.
My name is Bamise Fatoke, Oluwabamise, but I prefer to go by Bamise. I had to make that distinction in case you want to check me on LinkedIn. It won't be Bamise, it will be Oluwabamise. I'm a lawyer, I'm a trained lawyer, and I'm working as a tax consultant at KPMG Nigeria. Typically, my day involves a number of activities because I work in the tax and regulatory aspect of things. So we are still doing some help with tax computations, tax structuring, tax due diligence for companies looking to set up in Nigeria, looking to be fully compliant with the laws of Nigeria. And we also deal with general compliance, not just tax. There are a lot of regulatory bodies in Nigeria that are quite specific to your sector. So it could be the ICT sector, the oil and gas industry. There are so many aspects. For example, data compliance, technology registration. So that's what we do because they all work hand in hand to get financials and help a company's growth in whatever angle they want to take. So I look forward to having further conversations on this today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bamise, for that introduction. I'm just going to call on Wellington Ja to introduce himself, please. Wellington, are you on the call? Oh, if you unmute yourself, you're currently muted. Thank you. Please introduce yourself.
All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Wellington Ja, currently work with the Tax Justice Network as technical advisor. Particularly, the Tax Justice Network is a Pan-African organization comprising mainly about 31 institutions in about 18 countries across Africa, focused mainly in supporting or advocating towards resource mobilization, toward equality, and most importantly, supporting the combating of IFF across Africa. My position as technical advisor is mainly related to supporting organizational development, also related to policy management, looking at the strategic framework of the institution, working closely with our Stop the Bleeding campaign to ensure that African resources are secured. TGNA vision has always been to support African institutions in terms of capacity building, supporting policy formulation and dialogues and convening across Africa. So we look forward to a very healthy conversation today, and we will be looking forward to answer questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Shiri, to please introduce himself.
Thank you very much. My name is Tirivangani Mutazu. I work with AFRODAD, which is a Pan-African organization based in Harare, Zimbabwe. AFRODAD has been there since 1996, and mainly it was formed to push for campaigns on cancellation of debts, sovereign debts, to a number of African countries. And over the years, we've broadened the areas of focus to include economic development issues, domestic resource mobilization, where the issue we are discussing today is situated, which is tax issues. We also work on international public finance, basically looking at PPPs and international aid. So myself, I'm a senior policy analyst within the debt department, where we basically look at the policies of the debtor government, especially African government, in terms of their borrowing policies. If they are prudently managed, that is the debts. We also monitor the creditor institutions and government in terms of their lending policies, if they are in any way impacting development in our countries. Yeah, I think in short, I'm very happy. We are also part of the bleeding campaign, a member of the bleeding campaign, Stop the Bleeding campaign, spearheaded by Justice Network Africa. And we'll be very happy to be part of these discussions as we link them, especially to the debt issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. If you could just mute yourself as well as Ja as well, please. Thank you. And lastly, I will call on Lucky Star to please introduce herself. Hello.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone.
Hi.
Yeah, my name is Lucky Star. I'm in a place called Maastricht. I work here on Europe and Africa relations and that, but today I join you in my capacity as a postgraduate student at the University of Oxford studying taxation, which basically is a program that provides students access to national and international expertise across a range of topics and disciplinary perspectives, and has the potential really for me to strengthen not only the technical, diplomatic, and academic debate in this area, but also in future to help the developing countries in determining tax policy. So happy to be here.
Thank you very much for joining us today, to all our guests. And we look forward to a really fruitful conversation. I'm just going to call on Tori to please take it away with the first panel. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Oyin. Thank you, Bukola, and thank you to all our guests. For the first panel, we'll be having Bamise, Fatoke, and Tirivangani. And we'll be talking about the research, development, and policy landscape for tax justice. In this panel, we'll be looking at this particular topic in two perspectives. And one, we'll be looking at it from tax palliatives that has been issued to taxpayers. We want to know if the palliatives issued by some governments to taxpayers is sufficient, or there are more tax palliatives that we consider, we think government should consider. So, and secondly, we would also be looking at the second part of the topic. We'll be looking at, we are aware of the fact that the pandemic has exposed our healthcare system in Africa, and this can be traced down to the fact that some of African politicians and top businessmen have seeked tax havens in some other jurisdictions, which apparently is the campaign for the Stop the Bleeding campaign. So we want to look at if there are policies, or yes, there are policies that should regulate the illicit moving of funds from Africa to some other jurisdictions. And I'm very sure we are all aware of the Panama Papers scandal. We'll be having a discussion about that. So without further ado, I would like to ask Bamise. Hi, Bamise.
Hi.
Yeah, so Bamise, I want to ask you, as a tax consultant and an expert, in your opinion, how do you think businesses, most, likely small, medium enterprises, how do you think they can adjust or rather manage their tax liabilities, amidst the pandemic?
Okay. For businesses, I think I'm speaking for everyone if I say that we have sort of been sidelined by the COVID-19 situation, which was something no one has ever experienced of this nature. And when you started, the first point of call for most of our governments was to shut down the economy in a sense, and shut down flights. So evidently, a lot of businesses have felt the impact in one way or the other. So how can they manage it? First things first, I would say you have to be honest about yourself and look at your numbers. A lot of companies are not hitting the projections that they made at the beginning of the year or at the beginning of the financial year. So you need to even understand where your tax liability would be, or how it's the form it's going to take. And you have to be honest and speak to the tax authorities. In what sense? They need the money. I don't know how. They need that revenue, because not just the businesses, the government was also affected by it. We saw oil prices plummet, and there was a note, a memo from the FIRS that was basically pleading with telecommunications companies that, oh, we know you are doing well, we know you are making a lot of money, can you please pay your taxes, not just on time, can you pay it earlier on? So they need the money. But it won't change the fact that the balance sheet of a lot of people cannot handle it. So I think this is the time where companies can take advantage of pre-existing tax losses, your tax assets, your pre-existing tax losses, your capital allowances, reducing your costs, and take advantage of the extension that the government has given. They have, as a form of palliative, there has been extensions for filing of some returns. So if you liaise with the FIRS, work with your financial advisor, your accountant, work towards reducing your costs and take advantage of the extensions where necessary, the palliatives, the little palliatives, the incentives that have been provided by the government. And also, this is the time to look at your tax assets. Your tax assets can work for you at this particular period. So if I was talking to a business, this is the time to manage your tax liabilities, and this is how you can do it.
Thank you very much, Bamise. Now, talking about palliatives that has been given out to businesses by the government. And now I'm not talking about Nigeria. I'm talking about Africa, and if possible, in general concept to the world. because we are aware of the fact that there are some jurisdictions that have not even considered tax palliatives. Initially, about 2-3 weeks ago, we had the likes of Estonia and Bulgaria who um, who did not even consider tax palliatives. They didn't consider tax palliatives. So, who didn't even consider tax palliatives? So, but thank God, about 2 weeks ago, we found out that there was an updated report, and we discovered that these countries have actually considered tax palliatives. They're already giving out tax palliatives to taxpayers. Now, do you think the palliatives issued by the government, is it sufficient, or do you think there are more palliatives that the government should consider to businesses? As we all know that small businesses in most jurisdictions are the life, of the economy. So do you think there are more palliatives that should be issued to the government, issued to taxpayers?
Okay. Well, I will speak from the Nigerian angle because this is this is the information that I am fully aware of. The government, let me use in particular the tax authorities, they have done what they think they can. They have tried to do one or two things to sort of alleviate the pressure on small businesses and businesses in general, but still doesn't mean that it's enough, and I agree on that point. You see, there's waiver of late returns filing penalty. There's they've sort of put a pause on investigations and tax audits. But when you look at all this, there's still no mention on payments. Companies are currently experiencing tight cash flow. So even if there has been there's a bit of profit or something to have been paid, it's not certain how that translates to cash. And the government is also not speaking on that. So how would they make payments? Even if there's a bit of tax to pay, even if you've given an extension for people to pay their taxes, they are not talking about, okay, an extension. If you file your taxes at this period, you have an additional extension to pay. So if I was looking for something in particular, I will look at that. Then also, transfer pricing regulations haven't really been adjusted, or they haven't been spoken to with all the palliative measures that have come up. And it's important because a lot of companies or multinationals or companies dealing with international organizations or sister companies abroad have some dealings that will be affected by the pandemic due to also the travel restrictions and various factors. So there has been no olive branch extended to those people. And then for companies in the oil and gas sector, which is even particular because we are seeing a period where oil prices are not currently stable.
Hello, Bamise?
And they are going through financial issues. So if on palliatives, I think those three major points are creating any sort of palliative structure for their citizens or the corporate bodies in their economy. I think they will have to rethink eventually because, like I said, this is a new, everyone keeps saying new normal. This is something everyone is working through and no one was prepared for it. So we are seeing countries learning and adjusting, but the financial implications and the economic implications of that are yet to be seen. So if a company feels that it's strong enough, because no matter what happens, if your companies, your small businesses, your big institutions are not making enough profits, they cannot remit enough taxes. And if you need the taxes to move your economy, it's going to affect you. So it's a circle. Tax justice is not is an end-to-end it's an end-to-end program. So they would either have to pick up, or if they feel like some countries can afford to not give palliative, and they can afford to have a reduction in their tax remittance and what they receive from taxes. But if you can't afford it, I think it's something that they will have to rethink in the long term. Thank you.
I think we lost Toby there. Toby, are you still there? We'll just try and get Toby back just 1 second.
Okay, so while we're getting Toby back, thank you very much for that, Bamise. That was very, very enlightening. It was really lovely to hear from you. And
Bukola, I think you're on mute.
Right? Oh, sorry. Can you hear me? No?
Hello?
Can you hear me? No?
Yeah, I can hear you. We can hear you.
Great. Unmute everyone. Just for that. It's okay. Sorry.
Bukola, we can hear you. If you could please mute everybody else. If you can mute yourself as well, everyone, that would be great.
Yeah, please, help me do that, because it's a bit of a struggle. Right, I think this is it. So yeah, while we're waiting for, what I was saying is while we're waiting for Toby to join us again, thank you so much for that, Bamise, for contributing and your input, of course. I'm now going to call on Tiri, who I know has a very strong background in debt. Basically, share some top tips, or just give us some insight into what he thinks countries are going to now start dealing with, of course, going forward under our climate, basically. Tiri?
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity to share with colleagues our views currently at AFRODAD with regards to the COVID-19 impacts. I prepared my presentation in line with what we consider to be some of the insufficiencies at the regional and continental level in terms of the tax issues. But obviously, I will reflect on some of the questions you shared, given by the participants. But maybe for a start, let me just point out that the issue of tax is very important to most of our African countries in sub-Saharan Africa. But broadly, it should be taken in the context of domestic resource mobilization. As we are aware that a lot of our countries, they rely heavily. Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So I was saying that most of the economies in sub-Saharan Africa, they heavily rely on taxes, especially of goods and services, as the main source of revenue. And it is very important. It's a key, taxation is a key and fundamental state building foundation, especially between citizens and the state. So we at AFRODAD believes that without a fair and transparent, equitable and improved tax system in Africa, it will be very difficult to fund our development programs. Broadly, as you are also aware that the DRM, that is domestic resource mobilization, especially through taxation, has a financing role in most of our countries. And hence, these are some of the issues, whether COVID is there or COVID is not there or post-COVID. I think governments too have to address some of the issues we have raised over the years in terms of the insufficiencies or the structural challenges that still exist with regards to taxation issues. We still need to see governments contributing or creating conditions that are necessary to the creation of employment. I think previously there was a question raised along SMEs. I think in most of our countries, these are contributing greatly to the development of our countries. So it's very important that we still work on that, demanding that from our governments. As we are also aware that DRM still strengthen fiscal institutions. We have our institutions that are responsible for tax administration or tax collection, tax revenue management. I think there is still need for these ones to be strengthened going forward, even at the national level, at the regional level, and at the international level. Why are we saying this? I think what is key for us is we still have the SDGs and the 2063 agenda in the context of sub-Saharan Africa despite the COVID. And I think these, as we are aware, requires huge amount of resources going forward. And taxation is one of those ways and means in which our governments are raising those resources. Some of these development aspirations that our governments have put in place and how they are to be financed, even post-COVID or within COVID. Despite the structural challenges, I think some of them we are all aware of this. Our continent has a low per capita income at SMEs. We have large subsistence agriculture, and we've heard a lot about the sector, that is the agriculture sector, being the backbone of most of our economies. What is happening there in terms of taxation, I think is very key, not only during COVID or post-COVID, but even before the COVID. I think there were issues that we have been raising within that sector. The very small manufacturing and modern services that have been translated, and they should be translated anyway, they should graduate eventually into big business. So these are some of the structural challenges. Just to give you statistics here, I think as we are aware in terms of taxation, that the region, sub-Saharan Africa, is the lowest tax to GDP ratio if you have to compare with the other regions. And countries are struggling to collect sufficient revenue. Very few have reached a level of 15% of GDP in taxes. Very few of our countries have actually reached that, of which this is not enough to fund, for example, the SDGs, the Agenda 2063, and of late, the measures that our countries have put in place in terms of fighting COVID. So we really need to push these old issues with our governments, even during this COVID period. I think, as we said, AFRODAD is a member of the Stop the Bleeding campaign, where the issue of illicit financial flow is very central. I think this is a continental issue, this is a regional issue. COVID or no COVID, I think it's still an issue that we need to work around. As you are aware, it is a hindrance to effective domestic resource mobilization in the region. And they are possible, that is illicit financial flow is possible through various ways, of which I think a lot of participants are aware of some of these, which include commercial tax evasion, trade invoicing, abuse of transfer pricing, criminal activities, human trafficking, illegal, all of these. I think we are aware, and we've had a lot of debates on these ones. But I think it is an important issue that we need to give importance to, COVID or no COVID. And I'm also aware that in terms of the tax jurisdictions, currently there are reforms in place, I think in a number of African countries, on how best they can address the illicit financial flows, especially based on the recommendation from the MAKE report. In terms of how we have observed a number of African countries, that is in relation to taxation issues in this COVID period, I think it has brought to the fore that there is really need for economic diversification from a number of our countries. I think my colleague previously spoke of those countries that are all exporting, and they've been relying heavily on one export commodity. I think they are being affected heavily as we speak. And then this points to the need that the countries, they need to diversify their economies. The same with the lack of transparency and accountability, especially in the oil producing countries with regard to the revenues from those ones. Even those, again, that are producing raw materials without beneficiation of the economy. I think these are some of the broad issues which we can somehow situate how we have been losing in terms of revenue from taxation from most of our export-oriented economies in terms of Africa. But I think we all know the debates on the issues around the multinational corporations, how they are failing African countries in terms of revenue generation and collection. We all know about the double taxation agreements in place and all the pros and cons of those. I think I won't go into that. But just to say that as countries try to rebuild their economies going forward, I think we somehow admitted that as CSOs at some point we have failed to secure the international governmental tax body, but we need to continue to monitor the global tax system to ensure that international cooperation on tax matters are put in place, especially to reduce illicit financial flows from the continent. Because this has continued even within the COVID period in the last 4, 5, 6 months. I think we've seen a lot of capital outflow from a lot of developing countries where investors have really pulled out capital from their investment in our countries. And I think without national regulations in place, this is a way in which some of our countries are being affected or shortchanged. We have also seen that I'm sure that as we get into the post-COVID period, you see a lot of competition among African countries in terms of attracting FDI. And previously, we have seen the rest of the bottom where they completely remove taxes so that they attract FDI. But I think we need also to really monitor this as policies are put in place by our governments post-COVID. We have also seen, and we hope governments now they will try to address some of these issues that we have seen over the years, which somehow have been major drivers of harmful tax practices, mainly the poor governance, the weak regulatory structures in place, the double taxation agreements, and the tax incentives. I think these are some of the structural issues going forward that the government should actually address, because without all this being addressed, whatever measures, tax measures they put in place, in my view, I don't see them giving the development impacts we want. But also close to the debt issue, as you are aware at AFRODAD, I think even before COVID, a lot of sub-Saharan African countries were in debt distress, or most of them were really, their debt sustainability ratios were deteriorating. And I think by March, according to the IMF, there were almost like 8 African countries already in debt distress. and then most of them, 18, 16, were in what they consider to be high debt distress. So COVID came, the classification are still the same. But I'm happy to say that we have seen some of the international community through the IMF, the G20 coming up with those debt moratoriums on debt servicing. I think it has given breathing space to most of our countries in terms of the resources which they were supposed to use for debt servicing. Now they have to channel those ones to fight COVID-19. But still, without some structural changes within nations or at the national level, I think a lot of whatever measures are going to be put in place will not bring the intended impact. For example, if we still have weak public finance management policies internally, where we have no financial compliance, where there's no fiscal sustainability, where the allocation of resources is not effective, I think we will see a lack of provision of goods and services. And I think these are the issues we have been raising even before COVID. And I think we still need to make demands on them, not only at the national level or central government level, but I think at all the levels of the government, we need to push for this. Previously, we have been working on demands, that is making demands on government in terms of the legal framework that should be put in place, especially with regards to public finance management frameworks. During this COVID period, we have seen huge amount of resources being mobilized to fight COVID, and these are financial and sometimes material. So without a strong legal framework, I think a lot of corruption cases will be unearthed, even post-COVID or even during this COVID, because we have countries where corruption cases have been brought to the courts as a result of mismanagement of COVID resources. So in my view, I think it's very important that tax issues be addressed at the national, regional, and even at the international level, so that the resources that are available are effectively utilized. I think the other point also I have prepared here has to do with, in terms of the debtor countries currently, especially developing countries that are already struggling with their debt repayments, what they should do going forward within the COVID period. I think a number of them, we have seen them doing three things. Some have gone to the IMF to look for assistance, and they've been given huge resources through the IMF windows. We have seen other countries revisiting their budgets, especially their 2020 national budgets, where they are redirecting resources, especially to the health spending or health sector. And we have seen a lot of economic stimulus packages being put in place at the national level, despite the fact that the resources, in my view, are not enough at the national level to fund some of those economic stimuluses. So what is important at the moment, I think, is for countries to at least reduce their fiscal deficits through fiscal cuts or increasing tax revenue collection. I think the fact that countries have not been able to increase their tax revenues speaks a lot, especially to the economic growth and also to the ability of the institutions responsible for that. But going forward, I think there's need for these institutions somehow to be strengthened and the economy kickstart so that they can collect revenue. I think there's a need to reduce non-concessional borrowing. I think before COVID, we have seen a lot of borrowing from our government, especially on the international capital markets. They've been issuing bonds which normally have huge risks associated with. So there's need for our countries to stop non-concessional borrowing and somehow even think of stopping project financing. I think during this period, it's very difficult for our governments to look into that, the possibility of scaling down in terms of infrastructure project developments. In terms of how they should attract FDI going forward, I think it's very important there be an analysis of which sectors that would drive the economy going forward and how should they attract FDI in those sectors. I think it's very key. There's also a need for them to deepen their domestic financial markets because external debt, as we are aware, is very risky. And that's why a lot of our countries are in debt distress as we speak. The economic stimulus packages, yes, somehow they will trigger growth, especially the SMEs. I think from the few economic stimulus packages we have gone through here, for example, South Africa, Zimbabwe, and the other countries, there is a lot of funding going to SMEs. And I think it's important that these funds are properly used, and which SMEs, in which sectors. Well, it's very important that the SMEs in sectors that trigger development or economic growth be supported, and maybe not all the SMEs that have nothing to do with economic growth. The risks, yes, I've talked about this. There will be risks in terms of the debt. I think you know the interest rates, the rising of interest rates, especially in the USA. We can't rule out all this. The depreciation of our currencies, we've seen this as well, and the decline in international commodity trade. I think the COVID-19 induced lockdowns, they've actually stopped all the trading among the nations. So it's very important that we be aware of some of these risks as we go forward. I think going forward, there were some issues raised in some of the questions that were shared by the organizer in terms of what can countries do should they tax the rich. I think the issue of multinational corporations, we have had debates about this, that the multinational corporations are really failing a number of our countries in terms of revenue generation and collection. And this still needs to be hammered on, even during this COVID or even post-COVID, because that's where the potential, especially from the mining sector, that's where the potential to fund our development needs comes from, especially in terms of taxation. So maybe, yeah, let me say this is, yeah, in brief, that's what I have for now. Hello.
Thank you. Yeah, hello, Siri, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, wonderful presentation. Yeah, but looking at we know very well that countries right now, for example, Nigeria is looking to borrow, some funds from international bodies. Don't you think, or what do you think would be the effect in the long run of continuous borrowing to ease, the effects of the pandemic? What do you think would be the effects in the long run?
Yes, thank you very much. You are right in terms of there are quite a number of countries that have gone out to borrow money, maybe not from the IMF, but quite a number of African countries have gone to the IMF for assistance, especially in the name of fighting COVID-19 impact, economic impacts. But if countries borrow maybe outside the IFIs, the international financial institutions, I think if those debt resources are not put into good use or productive sectors, the ability to repay them, in my view, in the long run, will be difficult. I think it will be difficult for countries to repay them. So it's very important that as countries go out to borrow, the reasons and the strategies for doing that are very clear in terms of reviving the economies that have been impacted heavily by the COVID-19. In some countries, I think there are sectors of the economy that are getting government funding. Even if the government goes out and borrow, but it then puts it in the productive sectors. In my view, that's prudent debt management. But however, if resources are not transparently used or there are no accountability mechanism in place at the national level, of which in most of our countries, there are a lot of gaps or deficiencies in terms of transparency and accountability of debt resources. So yes, borrowing it's a good thing, but let it be used productively. We have seen developed countries, especially in the West or in the US, they've come up with huge amounts in terms of economic stimulus packages, of which most of those resources are being directed to your productive sector, your tourism, your mining. I think, yes, African countries can still do the same if it is within their debt sustainability levels. In my view, this is still okay, but transparency and accountability are very key to the success of any projects that are going to be financed through debt.
Thank you very much, Thierry. One more question. As a policy analyst, now you talked about debt management, which is very, very important for governments at this stage. But looking at the fact that now, like I said earlier, that we'll be looking at one of the scandals, a few years back, the Panama Papers, looking at the fact that we have some African politicians and some top businessmen who are seeking tax havens in some other jurisdictions. If in situations whereby African leaders or African governments have borrowed money, in order to mitigate and prevent the illicit, moving of funds from Africa to these jurisdictions, as a policy analyst, what policies do you think governments should look into, or rather, what policies do you think we as tax justice advocates should push for in order to prevent the illicit moving of finance of funds from Africa to other tax havens by these African politicians and businessmen?
Yes, thank you very much. I think this is a very important question, but you should also be aware of the Mozambican case, where not only politicians, but I think even the technocrats, the economists, the government workers within the Ministry of Finance, central banks, were equally responsible for siphoning debt resources or money that has been borrowed in the name of the nation, but never reached its intended purposes. So in my view, what we have somehow observed in quite a number of African countries, the policies are in place, the institutions are in place, but somehow there are challenges within the implementation, or we have weak institutions which are supposed to guard against especially illicit financial flows. So in my view, there is need to strengthen the institutions responsible. For example, we have our Ministry of Finance, we have our central banks, we have our debt management offices, we have our Auditor General's offices, different financial institutions within quite a number of countries. Are they doing their job, or are they supported or capacitated enough to really do their job? Because there are financial intelligence units in most of the Ministry of Finances, even the central banks, but somehow these are very weak. Not that there's no policy, they have a mandate, they somehow know what they're supposed to do, but it is sometimes the politics of the day in a given country, but also it is the ability of those institutions to have teeth. If you have been following what has been happening in Mozambique, I think I can safely say that there are institutions that were triggered to act on such an illicit financial flow. For example, the role of Parliament, the judiciary was called to act, the police, the law enforcement, and even collaboration from the destination of some of those proceeds. So internally, yes, there are institutions that are supposed to play that role, but also where the funds are going. I think equally destinations of illicit financial flows in terms of countries, governments, and institutions, they have an equal role to play, so that we don't continue to say the same things, but nothing happens. I think the Panama Papers really gave us an important perspective in terms of who are those mainly responsible for these illicit financial flows. So in my view, the politics of the day, yes, but they are enablers to that. So we need really to work with our internal partners and even our external collaborators to make sure that some of these outflows are stopped. Hello?
Hello, Bamise. Hello, thank you very much, Tiri. Thank you so much. Hello, Bamise, are you still there with us?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just one last question, Bamise.
Nope.
What tax policies do you think government should consider amidst the COVID-19 pandemic in order to financial burdens on taxpayers? What tax policies?
Your network is not very
Can
good.
you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Okay, I can hear you.
All right. I said, what tax policies do you think government should consider amidst the COVID-19 pandemic in order to ease the financial burden on taxpayers? What tax policies?
Oh, okay. Like I said, like I said, there's some loopholes in the policies that the government has brought about, but it's not all bad. It could still, if I could, an example would be in the past few years, I know the government had brought about the VADE scheme, voluntary assets income declaration scheme, and they also brought about the voluntary offshore asset regularization scheme. And we also have, which was brought to allow, it was brought about to allow some certain individuals who have not been compliant over a period of time to become compliant at no interest and no penalty charges if it was done within the prescribed period of time. So if I would think that the government can approach it using that sort of angle and providing a sort of tax caution for businesses. But at the same time, if we all recall, at the beginning of the year, the Finance Act was put into law, and the Finance Act had brought about some changes to how it reduced the CIT rates for small businesses or certain rates. It reduced the burden of remitting VAT on small businesses that reach a certain markup, I think 25 million turnover. So I feel like the government's mindset is some measures had already been put in place at the beginning of the year. And at the instance of the COVID-19 pandemic, they also brought in additional palliatives. So if they could think within that frame of mind, in addition to the other areas of concern that I pointed out earlier, I think it might help. And also, there's this road infrastructure development tax credit scheme that was put into force last year, which would also help companies, which this scheme might not be extremely beneficial for the small guys and the small businesses, but it would benefit companies with huge balance sheets, or even small businesses that are willing to collaborate and come together, where you fix roads in return for tax credits in addition to an uplift. And even the tax credit is tradable. It could be tradable on the stock exchange or on any exchange platform. So I feel like that all this in mind may make the government a bit reluctant to want to put in additional measures, because like I said, they need taxes. Taxes are what help move the economy. They need the money. So, but I'm looking for a regularization scheme, a sort of a tax scheme that will be extremely beneficial to those who are vulnerable to the COVID-19 pandemic. It doesn't have to come in the form of an extreme measure of no taxes, or it could just come in increased allowances, increased tenure to use your tax losses or to do other things. So I'm looking forward to more innovations from the government. And just to quickly address an issue that was brought up, not to answer the question, but because I know that we're going to have a Q&A session at the end. But the relationship between the tax authorities and the taxpayer is not a chaotic one. It looks like it is, but it shouldn't have to be. The FRS, I'm not on their payroll, so I'm not really speaking for them. But I know that if you are open to dialogue and you're open to speaking to them, and your books are a true reflection of what is happening in your company or your entity, or even you as an individual, then you can make headway. You don't even need to have an intermediary tax consulting practice. It would help because that's what we do. But if you are honest in your books and you speak to them, there won't be that much conflict between you and the tax authorities. And as an individual, most of our taxes for individual taxpayers are paid through the payee system, the PIT system. So for the most part, you may not even have to interface with them directly because your employers are doing that on your behalf. So for those who are looking to dialogue with the FRS, with the LRS, state internal revenue authorities, I would say go for it. And don't look at it as don't look at the taxman as your enemy. But the only thing you can pay is what you have in your pocket. And if you're open to dialogue, and I know they'll be open to communicating with you. I hope.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Bamise. We have to move to the second panel right now. Thank you very much, Thierry. Thank you very much for Bamise. It's been an exciting time speaking with you. I'm sure our speakers must have learned a lot. So right now, I'll be handing over to Oyin to take over the second panel session. Hi, Oyin.
Hi, Toby. Thank you very much. And thank you very much to Bamise and to Thierry as well. And so in this next session, we're having Lucky Star, we're having Dawn, and we're having Wellington. If you please just correct me if I'm saying your names properly. And Wellington, please let me know if you want me to call you or you want me to call you Wellington, because I'm not quite sure. Thank you guys for joining us. And so this session is really just going to be more about the institutions and what exactly can be done, you know, on the focus of the SDG 16, which is about strengthening institutions, democracy, the rule of law. With that in mind, so I've prepared some questions for the panel, and if you just feel free to answer, this could relate to either one of you in terms of your technical knowledge and expertise. So if you are looking to speak, please do go ahead and speak on the questions. So my first question really on institutions would be, beyond protesting, beyond naming and shaming, beyond public outrage, what sort of, if we're speaking about the African continent, for example, what regional instruments are in place to hold organizations accountable? Or is the solution really just domestic? And would it be heavily reliant on political will? Or is there a way to kind of create some form of regional accountability measures that can be implemented? So I hope that question is clear enough. And if any one of you want to pick up the questions, thank you.
Thank you. I can jump in on that and speak very briefly so that the others can also speak. We actually do have, I think, a relatively strong regional instrument. The only problem is that it has not come into force. We have what is known as the Malabu Protocol, the protocol that will extend the jurisdiction of the African Court on Human and People's Rights to also handle international crimes. I mean, to operate a bit like the ICC. There are a number of economic crimes are already provided for there: corruption, money laundering, illicit exploitation of natural resources. And unlike any other legal instrument, it provides for corporate criminal liability on top of the individual criminal liability of individuals. So if one puts this together, one then finds that several of the aspects of what we're talking about, tax evasion, tax crimes, illicit financial flows generally, could actually be prescribed at the continental level when it does come into force. So it exists. What we need to do is to get states to ratify the instrument so that it comes into force. As of now, I think about 15 states have signed, but only one, Guinea, has ratified. So that's where our campaigns should focus. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I think I'm going to come in after you, Dom, and thank you for that. So I wanted just to, first of all, back the argument that we do have existing instruments on the continent to deal with some of these issues, but our countries have also signed on to a lot of international instruments that exist, and these instruments need to be used. So the question rather has been, why have we signed on to some international instruments that we haven't domesticated and that we haven't used in terms of dealing with the issue of illicit financial flows, tax avoidance, and tax evasion? And I think here is where we need also research to come into place, and research and advocacy. So research is first to identify which instruments our countries have signed on to and where they've reached in terms of implementation, in terms of evaluating even the Mbeki report itself. It's a commitment towards something that all African countries have signed on to. So what have they committed to do in terms of ending illicit financial flows? Have they committed to finding data? What have they done? So a lot of these reports are just our countries sign on to them and say they're going to implement them at national level, but they don't do it. So I think it's the next step. Another thing to mention on this is the issue of policy coherence for sustainable development. So we are talking about making the policies more coherent and not having a one-size-fits-all, so to speak, in Africa, that, or the policies that are being implemented in Europe and coming up with country-by-country reporting, for example, that we are going to copy-paste the same country-by-country reporting rules in Africa. And just one thing there is ATF has come up with a lot of guidelines that African countries can use when it comes to custom making some of these policies to be tailor-made to national context that we have in the continent. So those were the 2 points that I wanted to add on that question.
Thank you very much for that, Lucky Star. Wellington, do you want to add to that as well? You're on mute. Ja Wellington, you're currently on mute.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm on, I think so. Sorry, I just wanted to look mostly from the institutional angle and mostly too from the angle of kind of resources that has been placed in actually identifying the drivers and making some recommendations. The UN ECA panel on
So
how
sorry,
the
your service seems to be breaking up a little bit. I don't know what happened.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think I can hear you a bit better now.
Okay, so I was trying to say there are also processes that took place. There was the UN Economic Commission for Africa report, which provided several recommendations for trying to cope illicit financial flows.
I'm
And the
so
recommendation.
sorry. I think we're having the same problem again. I really apologize. I'm not sure what's going on. It seems to be.
Are you not hearing me?
No, it's breaking up a little bit. It seems to be sort of like a static sound. I don't know if you've got earphones in or something.
Are you hearing me now? Are you hearing me clearly?
Yeah, I can hear you. I would just continue. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was trying to say there are already institutional structures. So the high-level panel was actually designed with the mandate of monitoring the recommendation. First, to assess the situation, identify actually what the situations were. They were able to estimate the outflow about 50 billion a year. They were able to say multinational companies are attributable to about 60% of this outflow. They were able to say revenue uncollected are actually about 14%. And able to lay out some recommendations. What is clearly needed is of some of the framework. We talk about multi-policy monitoring that relates to transparency, particularly beneficial ownership, monitoring policy that relates to transparency-based exchange of information, and also building partnership with institutions. Partnership with institutions at the level and trying to ensure African voice is very much influence.
I'm so sorry, Wellington. I'm not sure we can. I don't know if anybody else can hear very well, but I'm not quite.
Actually, Wellington, the problem is not your volume. Your volume is fine. The problem is your internet connection. It's a bit weak, so it keeps on breaking up.
I'd suggest, Wellington, if you could disable your video.
My video is disabled already.
So sorry about this.
Hi, Wellington. Do you want to go? Do you want to go out and then come back in again?
Are you hearing me now?
Okay. Hello? Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes, probably. Okay. Yes, so maybe the colleagues can go on. I'll come back in later.
Actually, it seems I can hear you now. But I don't know if it will start again. But if you just keep on speaking now, and if it starts again, then maybe just log out and back in.
Okay, so if I'm very clear, I was trying to look at the current institutions that are available and the need for political will to strengthen the institutions, mostly related to monitoring. And one of the core areas I mentioned earlier was policy monitoring framework. For example, the illicit financial flows in Africa, the UN ECA has been able to identify clearly, or they have been able to provide a clear definition. They have been able to identify the details and provide recommendations. However, the political will to implement some of the recommendations, for example, transparency and beneficial ownership. How can we move that forward? What kind of framework can we put in place to monitor those kind of progress? I think those are the kind of direction we need to be looking at. And in terms of partnership, there are currently structures. There is the UN structure. Actually, what is needed is for African voices to be more strengthened, to be very much influential, and to ensure that Africa is mostly participatory in practical decision making. This has even clear impact on the way our and digitalization taxes are being used. I mean, processes are being used to siphon revenue to illicit financial flow. So one thing is the monitoring framework, and the institution, even the civil society, has role to play. We also have a very bigger role to play in terms of research, in terms of policy engagement, in terms of capacity building, in terms of engagement at different levels that can be able to resolve the issue of illicit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wellington. That was really, really useful. And you made some points there, and just to go over them, you mentioned that there are monitoring frameworks, and one of the key issues that the continent is currently dealing with is political will. And so with that in mind, is there a way to hold individual countries accountable in terms of, rather than just having to rely on political will alone, to ensure that illicit financial flows are restricted to a minimum as much as possible? And that's to anyone, Donald.
Well, maybe I can continue from where I stopped, since the question was built on clearly on what I was saying. Clearly, if you observed even the HLP structure that I spoke about, there is a clear need for monitoring. There was a mandate given to the committee to monitor the framework, but however, the effectiveness of that institution to monitor is one thing that is needed. And that political will that we are requesting sits with the African Union Commission, sits with various governments of Africa, for example, in making sure beneficial ownership owners are published, in making sure the tax expenditure are very well reduced, in making sure that revenues are not used and revenue are used very actively for the benefit of people, ensuring inequality is reduced at the national level. And the community level, there has to be participation. There has to be grassroots organization who can hold, for example, the district commissioner responsible. And that's what the Start the Bleeding campaign is about. And those are some of the strategies beyond the ordinary political will who sits at the top. Thank you.
Thank
May I
you.
come in again?
Yeah, please do.
I think another area, and thank you, Wellington, for those points made. I think another area that we need to look at is the why. Why haven't these policies, why is there no so-called political will? And I think one of the things that, one of the ways that we can do this is actually through what we do, or part of my work here, which is research on political economy analysis, which you basically have to look at what are the structural factors. In our country, a lot of what the history is, what is the foundation of this. You have to look at the formal and informal institutions and how those ones work. So for example, you might have the revenue authorities wanting to implement a policy or to find out or to get money back, but they have to go through the Ministry of Finance, which has to go through Parliament, and there's a process of that. You have to look at who the actors, political elites and agencies are, because we're talking about money, we're talking about influential people in this. We have recommendations like taxing high net worth individuals. These have high implications in our country. These are not other politically exposed people. These are just not people you can say that we are going to start taxing you today. There's a process of going about it. We're talking about looking at the sector characteristics, the public goods, the governance implications of some of the policies that we want to introduce. And we're talking about also looking at the external factors. So some of these multinationals, for example, you will find out that you try to tax them in Africa and they go and complain about it in an EU country, and then you're stuck in a court of arbitration, for example. So an approach of like what I call what I've mentioned are 5 lenses of looking at a political economy approach to realize where our advocacy work can have most impact. So I think this is how we need to target it, because there's one thing of our presidents. I'll take another example of how we sign on to double tax agreements that can be signed on by a president or a minister of finance, and then it's supposed to be implemented by the revenue authorities. So the person signing doesn't even understand the legality of the document that they've gone into, and doesn't do it in consultation. So in our advocacy, our ask can be, for example, the coordination between some of the institutions that we have in-house. So that's my addition to the points from Wellington.
Thank you very much, Lucky Star. That was really, really useful. And as a lawyer, Don, so this question is going to be for you, but I welcome anybody else also to chip in. In the development sphere, there's a lot of talk about, of course, human rights approach towards development. And if we're looking at tax, is there a human rights approach to tax at the moment in terms of with regards to the issue of COVID-19 and just regionally separate from the COVID-19 issue? And how far really has that been to kind of motivate the political will into holding institutions accountable or creating institutions that can enforce, the issue of illicit financial flows?
Thank you again. And I'll try once again to be brief so that we can have more and more interactive debate. I would say that we start with a very simple principle in terms of handling COVID-19, but also just generally in terms of providing the goods and services that our people need. And that is put the people first. Put the girls and boys, the women and men in your country, in your region, in your continent first. Not just the corporations, especially foreign corporations, and not just about their bilateral investment treaties and the double taxation agreements. What we have seen in the management of COVID is even where states have acted, they seem to have thought of the needs of big business first, rather than the needs of the ordinary girl and boy, woman and man. So we started with, tax incentives. We started with, lowering taxes. We started with giving incentives mostly to big business. We locked people up in the ghettos without clean water to wash their hands, without soap, without food, and so on. So that's what needs to change. That's the basis of a human rights approach. And incidentally, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights has actually been undertaking a study on the impact of IFFs on human and people's rights. Unfortunately, just like everything else, its validation processes have now been slowed down by the onset of COVID-19 and in our ability to meet, they were used to meet, but we're going to come up with a report on that. But we also encourage national human rights institutes. Most of our countries have a national human rights institution, an NHRI, to establish units focused solely on economic, social, and cultural rights and economic justice issues, and to collaborate with each other. And we should remember that many NHRIs are actually also quasi-judicial tribunals. They can actually hold hearings like courts, but they can also just hold public hearings generally like parliaments. As PALU, we're prepared to litigate in this area of illicit financial flows at the African Court on Human and People's Rights as a human rights issue. And of course, we look forward to a time when it will also be a criminal law issue, as I've spoken about before. But we're also able to litigate and happy to litigate at national levels in African courts, in courts in Europe. So we support, as Wellington has reminded us twice, and I think Tiri also did, we really support the initiative of our colleagues in Mozambique, whose constitutional court last month declared null and void loans worth $1.4 billion, which triggered the country's worst financial crisis when they were revealed. And we really welcome that. I've also just received a report, actually, just as I was getting to this call, that the Court of Appeal in Kenya has also annulled the contract between Kenya and China for the standard gauge railway, which of course was also riddled with a lot of corruption. So we are also supporting TJNA, Tax Justice Network Africa, which is engaging in repeat litigation in Kenya concerning the double taxation agreement with Mauritius. You remember that they managed to get the first DTA annulled, and the president very rudely, inside I think of a month, if not less, actually signed a new DTA, which they're now challenging. So there are various ways, I think, including using courts, and not only courts, where we can challenge the human rights implications of the tax issues and on IFFs rather successfully. And of course, there are also the special mechanisms of the UN. Thank you.
Can I come in again? Thanks, Dom. I think maybe just to take it to the next level where Dom has left it off going to the UN. And I think one of the things that we need to think about when we're looking at this issue of taxation is that we're not starting from a blank page legally. So we do have international instruments aside from the ones that we're trying to promote at the African level. We do have international instruments on human rights that our countries have already signed on to at the international level, including the economic, social, and cultural rights, including obligations for international assistance and cooperation. And these are instruments that we can, sort of our cards. We can pull out these cards and say, hey, well, you've already signed on to this. And this has an implication on taxation and also reducing and tackling issues of inequality. This can help us in terms of tackling tax evasion and tax avoidance. This can help us in terms of creating reasons to not have corporates pay less taxes in developing countries, especially our countries in Africa, and declaring no or even less taxes in their own developed countries and trying to look for tax havens where they can, structure some of the things that they're doing in this. So I think my emphasis on this is that we already have instruments, and sometimes we are trying to come up with our own African sort of instruments that Dom has mentioned, which is a very good way to go about it. But our countries have already signed on to a lot of international instruments when it comes to human rights. And I think with COVID, we have to think about financial resilience. To me, does have a tax angle and does have a human rights angle. We can't think of it in isolation from what we're doing right now or from some of the measures that we are introducing. So I think looking at what we have and what we can use to say that indeed tax is a human rights issue, it hasn't been considered such. I think if you look at it, even here in Europe, some of the instruments that they introduced on human rights don't mention taxation. It is now that it's becoming more and more an issue that we consider, but there are some normative legal instruments that we can use and also start that discussion, especially basing it also on the issue of inequality that it creates not only within country but across country.
Thank you very much. That was really useful. However, and I'm putting it to all three of you again, you mentioned the Economic and Social Rights Convention, which is a heavily debated convention that a lot of people, although they signed up to it, litigating within that convention has always been quite difficult. So in relation to taxation, then, how do we use such an instrument, and as well as the other ones that you said that we do have within the international system, to actually hold institutions accountable across countries and regionally?
I think the first thing that we need to do is first promote an awareness of what this instruments say, of what is said and what we can link to tax, that we can actually go and look at the Economic and Social Council documents that have been signed on to, and see that it does have a way of monitoring, and it does also have a way of having countries be held accountable for not implementing some of the rights that people have, and if we can attach this to taxation. I think it's also about the universality of some of the instruments we do have, and I was also thinking about the one on women's rights, and I think this is an instrument that we have seen used in countries, especially in Latin America, to go back and tell the UN that there are violations, there are tax policies that our countries are introducing that actually violate women's rights in our countries, and they've actually gone into litigation and won some of these cases. So I think we need to look at what is happening around, how these instruments are going to be used. And like for me with Africa, and I think Dom might have more to say about this, but it's our context. It's how do this apply when we look at our own taxpayer rights within how they're provided for legally in our legal systems, and if we can invoke some of these international instruments and use them. So those would be some of my thoughts.
Don, do you have anything to add to that before I ask a final question?
I'll just speak half a minute on that. I think Lucky Star said it all. What we are guilty of, many of us, is just lack of imagination, even in our litigation. It's just lack of imagination that we're guilty of. The standards are there, and yes, you can talk of the International Convention, you can talk of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, which is very strong on economic, social, cultural rights and group rights. You know, actually the first international instrument to actually provide for that. So the UN had to learn from Africa and copy Africa on that. We're just not being dynamic and robust enough in litigating. If you see the examples that I've given, and I don't want to belabor the point, is where we stand up and we decide that we're going to find a way. Where there's a will, there will be a way. And there's some good examples to rely on.
Thank you very much for that. And just as a final question, in terms of the donor space, so we have like USA DFID, which is now FCDO, and the likes. I wanted to ask, what intervention programs would, for example, the African continent like to see across our various countries, of course? And are there any programs that have already been implemented that any of you three that might be aware of, and where are the gaps that you would like them to step in, if at all you think it's in their place to step in the first place?
Okay, so yeah, so at first I started by thinking that I think with COVID, the whole idea has been to move away from thinking that donors are going to be the answer, but indeed we're talking about an issue of international taxation, and I think whenever we mention it, we talk about an international system, and we do operate in cooperation or collaboration with others, and this is becoming also a realization among donors. So before we did have initiatives, or we do have initiatives, maybe Wellington can talk more about that, but we had a tax initiative that's about 50 donors, including the European Union. I'm mostly using it as an example as I'm based here and work closely with the European Union. And they did have commitments of how to support African countries on domestic resource mobilization. We've seen a lot of budget support coming to African countries. We've seen a lot of administrative support, the issue of capacity being built, but we're seeing institutions like ATAF also push for more collaboration when it comes to writing business cases for getting back money. I think we've seen the case in Sudan, we've seen the case in Nigeria of getting back some of the illicit flows that had flown out and wherever they were, using World Bank instruments like STAR. And these are working, I think, in collaboration and need to work. So donors are putting more efforts in that regard, and asset recovery, money laundering, we all know all those things. But then the other things that are a bit weak. So recently, for example, we've heard of the European list of non-cooperative jurisdiction, list of tax havens. And this is also sometimes viewed as a list that is just, to blacklist developing countries, are not really looking at what is happening within. So I think when it comes to tax and international cooperation, then one of the things that donors need to do is make sure that they work in collaboration with the countries, not to come and impose the usual, what aid did and why aid is such a failure, is because there's no one, usually the policies are made here to be imposed in an African country. So you're sitting in a tiny city in Europe, and then you're making policies that are going to be implemented in Africa. You don't understand the context, you don't understand the avenues that you can use, you don't understand whether it's going to work or not. Another thing in the context of COVID that have heard being raised, and this is not specifically my area of tax expertise, but the issue of supporting digitalization. So now with quarantine, with lockdowns, and how to collect tax, a lot of questions around that. We still know a lot of our countries are not as mature in terms of implementing digital taxation rules. And this is something where donors can, or developed countries can also work very well in collaboration with African countries, because most of the, to implement, let's say, a VAT on a digital company that is registered in Europe, you need collaboration with the European company to know, to the European government to know of a beneficial owner of a company, you need collaboration. Exchange of information, you need collaboration. So there are those are some of the gaps that are coming up that we do have areas that we can collaborate with, and donors should focus efforts in these areas.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, I'll have to end the panel on that note. However, we do have question and answer session following. And if any of you still wants to emphasize on any of the points that I've made during the Q&A, that's totally welcome. However, we would also like to invite everyone else who is currently on this webinar who would like to ask their questions to please put them in the chat so that we don't have people talking over each other. Everyone, please still remain on mute. And some conversation has already been ongoing within the chat. And so I guess I could invite Bukola to sort of go through, from the beginning, for some of the questions that have been raised, if they haven't been addressed yet in the chat. And even maybe to just speak on the things that have been addressed in the chat, actually, just for anyone who hasn't looked through the chat yet. Bukola, so do you want to maybe make a start on that?
Yes. Thank you very much, Oyi. Thank you very much to all our speakers for just being so fantastic and sharing the insight. It's been so lovely. The chat has been going off, as we would say. I think so far the questions have been answered. So in terms of like where to find more information, I know there's a link shared to the IMF's website, and that was very useful. There's also ATAF facts. So just basically links to where the speakers got their information, or where people could get more information on what they're talking about. So that's really great. Thank you very much for that. We do have some other questions that we have already that we received from our from people from our through our inbox. I was just hoping we could go through those ones with everyone. So even okay, I think that's still good. Just bear with me 1 second. Wayne, do you have them in front of you? Slightly.
Sorry, do I have what in front of me?
Okay, I've got the questions. I was just seeing if you could start without me, but it's all right. So I feel like most some of the first, especially the first three questions we had ahead of our session that we wanted to really tackle, especially to do with the economic recovery of nations, how tax justice can of course contribute to this. That's been answered very lovely by Lucky Star, as well as every other person that has spoken. So I know Donald mentioned something from Don mentioned from his own experience working with like CSOs and some of the other charities, and coming from like the almost private sector. So that's been really good, just to see how the different parties involved can help with that. And of course, the tax policies that government should consider. Bamise did mention, and she did speak very explicitly on that. And of course, the last one, which was we really wanted to drill to the bottom of, which was to do with how we can build resilient institutions. I don't know who it was that said this, but like where there's a will, there's a way. So we really do need to start from somewhere, and we can't just keep putting it to one side, expecting it that magically things will work without us putting in the hard work. So that was really, really good. I've got another question, however, from the audience, from a member of the audience, and it's to do with regressive tax systems. So can we expect more regressive tax systems in days to come due to this crisis, or can it wake up countries, or wake countries up to tax the rich and the multinationals? I'm sure someone would have mentioned that before, or would have touched on it, but if someone else could just from their perspective and what they know, just chip in on that, that would be great.
Okay, maybe I should jump in. Are we there?
Yeah, absolutely. Take it away, Wellington. I'm just going to mute my microphone.
Okay, very good. So I think going forward from the kind of reflection and exposure COVID has brought about, there is a need to look clearly at federalization. There is a need to look at issues associated with human development and universal healthcare coverage. And for that reason, progressive taxation is very important. If you follow the African environment, clearly there are over 70% of African women involved in food production. However, or agriculture and food production, however, most of the taxes that are not benefiting them are very, very regressive and needs to be changed. They also have so many privileges. For example, in South Africa, there is clear issue of gender disparity related to land and land for agricultural development. Even though we have over 70% of women working in that sector, there's issue of food security, which we have to address clearly through a tax system that is so progressive. The fact that communities, our health system, people will not even be able to sustain themselves beyond a day. Some countries pronounce lockdown, and the next minute they were able to say, oh, we cannot have total lockdown because of the subsistence level of livelihood. Means people are deprived, means they need to advocate very largely to kind of bring the system to balance. And for that reason, there should be more taxing of corporate income profit. There should be more taxing of rich people. There should be more taxing of businesses, for example, that have been booming over this period. There should be some moratorium or some restriction for incentives and other benefits, particularly to countries who are linked to doing businesses in tax havens. We should be more focused and forward-looking. There should be no need to begin to rely heavily on regressive tax, but rather a fair system which is more progressive. Thank you.
I just wanted to make a few comments on that question before we go to the next point. You were asking about if more countries will be leaning towards a progressive system, and I'll just double down on what Wellington has said. I think it will most definitely be dependent on each different country and their different styles. But can you hear me?
I can hear you, but the question is, can we expect more regressive tax systems, not progressive?
Yes. Yes. Right. So I don't think we should. Sorry for remixing the question. I don't think we should expect more regressive, because regressive tax systems, well, depending on the form, because by the very nature of an effective tax system, it should be equitable, easily ascertained. Like, the basis of it doesn't even promote. But I think it will also depend on the type of taxation. For direct taxes, for example, you should expect the person earning more should be liable to pay a bit more. But for the indirect tax system and consumption tax and value-added tax, a more regressive, or let me not say regressive, a more fixed tax rate might work, because the goods and services being traded under that system affects everybody, including and since a lot of people are going through a change in their economic status, there may be a need to be wary of changing the or increasing the indirect tax system that will affect people directly in their pockets. So there may not be a one-size-fits-all approach to deciding on or foreseeing a regressive tax system, but there will have to be a sit down, analyze the taxes that may have to be affected, and then some might be regressive and some might be progressive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bamise, for that. And I know I was I think it was last month actually, at Sierra Leone mayor, the mayor of Freetown introduced a new tax system, like a land tax system that basically requires, people who live in like the more affluent, the richer part of the city to pay more. So if they send like valuers and surveyors really to look and see what type of material the property was made out of, if they see that they're more comfortable, then they're likely to get taxed a bit more than people who are probably living in not as great or fancy accommodation. So basically just to lend my own voice and what I know on it as well, like how some of the tax systems, especially with not a one size fits all. So that's a very unique and a very innovative way of fixing or solving some of the problems that are perhaps faced by a lot of Sierra Leoneans, and that's a good way to tax, in my opinion. So yeah, that's great. So thank you very much for that, for your opinions and how countries can move forward and how we can all make progress on that part. I don't know if Terry is still with us. Are you still with us, Terry? There is a question here that I was hoping maybe you could share some of your knowledge on, and it's to do with how can developing countries that are already struggling with consumption budgets and debt repayment domestically mobilize resources to finance the development in a post-COVID world. So we've all touched on this, every speaker has touched on this. But I was hoping maybe we could get, I know we had a bit from him earlier about debt management, but in relation to this specific question, if Terry could just jump in, and I can see he's still here, so that's great. I can, well, you're not on mute, so we can definitely hear you if you speak.
Hello.
Hello. Hi, Siri.
Yes, I had parts of your question, but anyway, if it has to do with domestic resources, domestic debt. I think the advantage with number of African countries currently is that the levels of their domestic debts, except for a few countries, are not that bad. And they have an option to roll it over. So I think that can easily be managed by the authorities in different countries. But I also think that there's a disadvantage to especially to the local industry or to the local creditors, because once the government rolls over the payments, then it does affect the local industry, which we are trying to help or to capacitate so that they start their economic activities. So if they give services to government or provide PPPs, and eventually the government takes time to pay, I think naturally that does affect their business. So in a post-COVID environment, I would expect the government to pay up because as you are aware, a number of local companies are very much involved in the production and provision of PPPs to fight against COVID-19. So if they are not paid, in my view, that's really a blow to their economic activities. But of course, governments have that option of rolling over their domestic debt.
So let me chip in on the topic. Can I chip in, please?
Yes, please. Absolutely.
In terms of other sources of domestic revenue, there is a need to look inward. For example, most African countries are resource rich, yet the resource sector are discount to revenue generation, particularly domestic revenue. For example, you look at Liberia, the mining sector contribute a whole lot to overall economic activity, more than 75%, but contribute a little 5% to revenue generation. There has to be need to reduce the gap so that there is resources in those sectors. We need to be able to pull them up. Okay, another thing that needs to be done is for African countries to set up institutions and play by the rules. Transparency can only be attained, for example, by instituting policy, by making sure the issue of incentive is not done behind the curtain, that is done in the process from the community to the legislature, so that everybody is aware. There should be reporting, for example, of tax expenditure. When government design the budget, there should be an expenditure component of that budget which says to attain, for example, 1 billion in revenue generation, we are going to expand, for example, this XYZ amount as expenditure to gain these taxes, so that the public is aware. I think transparency in the process is also needed, and there is need for grassroots intervention as well.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Wellington, for that. That was really, really good. And yeah, I completely agree with you that, we need to, well, countries in Africa, and everywhere actually, needs to, play by the rules. And the issue with transparency, opaque business is obviously not helping anyone. So, Lucky Star, do you have anything? I know you also do a lot of work around domestic resource mobilization. Would you like to chip in? Anything you've got to say on that?
Yeah, just quite shortly. I think the thing is we need to step up the Africa game, I think, when it comes to the whole issue of building our financial resilience and putting tax justice at the heart of some of these conversations, but also giving it a human face. So giving it the human rights-based approach that we are speaking about. And this basically, to me, means that we now need to move from saying also that we've signed on to a lot of documents, that there are documents out there, to really seeing how this have been helpful to our countries, or this have been helpful to our people, or policymakers are using this instrument to sort of further the discussion. So I think this is where we need to go. We've mobilized a lot as organizations or as people working in this area. We've produced a lot of research, but now we need to use them. We need to invoke them in some of this discussion. We need to invoke the recommendations that we've made and sort of give the way forward and be more involved in this discussion. So those would be my parting points.
Thank you very much, Lucky Star. I just have another question in the chat box that just come straight to us. And I think this is for everyone. So are governments moving towards self-preservation tax measures post-COVID-19, seeing the huge demand for revenue in the health sector and general domestic resource mobilization from RM?
I was attempting to respond to that question on the chat, but I think what is required, given the situation, is, for example, in the health sector, there is a need to emphasize universal health coverage. The Abuja Declaration calls for about 15% health expenditure. When we did an analysis of Africa, for example, each Africa, the average health expenditure is 6%. That is a big gap in terms of what we need to attain. So I think government needs to take some of these declarations seriously and allocate resources in those regard, and even the taxing structure. If you cannot finance totally, we saw some of them taking measures like Burkina Faso and Mali during the COVID period, giving a zero duty to awarding zero duty to the importation of health products and so forth. If you cannot adequately spend in these sectors, there has to be some incentive, not only to the multinational companies, but to the import of these health products, so that the society as well can benefit at the cheaper cost. That's just maybe a bit of the response to that question.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Let me just add something to that, moderator. I think what we are seeing is a lot of small-mindedness and a lot of small thinking in many African countries. A challenge as huge as COVID-19 and its various ramifications on our polity, on our economy, on our society, and even on our culture is a challenge that no government can solve on its own. Yet we are seeing much less recourse to multilateralism, much less recourse to the regional institutions, the continental institutions, than we should see. Supply chains and value chains, not just for health sector products, but generally have been severely disrupted. We need to construct new supply chains. No one country can stand on its own. Yet what you're seeing is people looking inwards, thinking they can solve all these problems themselves, when actually they can't. So actually what I call for more is much more conscious thought around how do we fast track implementation of the African Free Continental Trade Area, because we're going to need it. How do we fast track regional value chains, regional supply chains, and regional approaches to this problem? Rather than this thing that it looks like you think that if I tax the people I'm already taxing more, I'll get somewhere. Yet we know that in many of our countries, it's maybe 20%, maybe at most 40% of the population that contribute the majority, of the tax that's there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Don, for that. That's very, very useful. Useful thought, food for thought going forward. Yes, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we are actually coming to the end of our webinar today. We've got 3 minutes, so I'll just like to use this opportunity to thank everyone so all our speakers for joining us today and our panelists, and for engaging with us in such an amazing engagement style of questioning and just information presentation. So thank you so much to Beza, who is our contact person, who's been a fantastic person and working with us to organize this from the end of TJNA, Tax Justice Network Africa, and of course the Stop the Bleeding Africa campaign. Thank you so much for the hard work. To all our guests today, thank you so much for tuning in and for coming to stop by and just to learn and engage with us and on this platform. We will make the information, like I said earlier, available to everyone on the guest list, and that will be coming in a couple of days' time. So please do expect that from us, including the questions as well. So if anyone's missed like the link we will find a way to extract that so we've got it in a different format and it's not just lost with this. And finally, I'd like to thank my team for being such an amazing, just being amazing and for working with us tirelessly to get this up and running. It's been fantastic speaking to everyone today and learning so much more about you know, the world of tax, how to build you know, strong institutions especially. So thank you very much. I'll be leaving. I know for a fact that I'll be leaving with a lot of information. And yeah, if you'd like to know more about the Stop the Bleeding Africa campaign, you can find them at stopthebleedingafrica.org. You can also follow Tax Justice Network Africa. The social media links are below, as well as the Stop the Bleeding Africa link, which is Stop IFF on Twitter. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. We are Capvine, and we do organize, you know, sessions like this every once in a while, as well as being content creators, just to, you know, pass on the information from the experts to people who are very interested in knowing more about what goes on within the development space. So I'm going to call in the other guys. Toby, Oyin, do you guys have any other things to add to it?
Yeah, thank you very much. Oyin, you go ahead, Oyin.
Okay, no, I don't have anything in particular to add, just to say thank you to every one of our panelists for your contributions to the discussion.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to buttress what Bukola and Oyin said, thank you very much to our guests and thank you to everyone who made it a day with us. We're excited to have you and we hope that subsequently you keep joining us for conversations like this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
On. Go. Yeah. So coming in.